Let's talk about the Convention of States. So, we've been talking about first the potential for international conflict, but that leads us into internal conflict, people believing fake news. We've got a problem in the federal government. People aren't feeling like they're being represented. There's a lot of people who wonder if a Convention of States, Article 5 Convention of States to amend the Constitution, I think.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Let me pull up this story from Business Insider. This is Business Insider. Trump-tied conservatives are 15 states away from an unprecedented rewrite.
Is that
of the
you or
Constitution.
me?
I don't know if Trump would call me a tied conservative.
I thought you guys were rhinos. I mean, I'm surprised to hear that you're
now we're Trump
based
guys.
Now we're Trump conservatives. So there you go.
So 15 states are away from an unprecedented constitutional convention. Now, I bring up this article simply because they're shocked. They're worried. There may be constitutional amendments at the state level. I think it's fantastic. So what is this? They're freaked out because they think it's a bad thing. We've had people already saying they're concerned that if you get uniparty establishment types to have the power of a convention of states, it's going to be gutting the Constitution. My view on that one, my counter before I'll throw it to you guys is the state level guys aren't the federal level establishment rhinos. People working at the state level are voted in by much smaller amounts of people. So when it comes to a convention of states, you've got state reps, state legislators. So these are local guys. Why is it that you guys want this? What are your thoughts on it? Is it good or bad? Obviously,
well, I think first of all, one of the most telling things about that Business Insider article, there's a statement of absolute horror that Congress couldn't control it, the president couldn't control it, and the courts couldn't control it.
You mean the central government could not act?
Oh my God.
What are we going to do?
Absolute horror, right? So I literally saw that article. It's a hit piece against us, and I thought, this is fantastic.
It's against you. It's a hit piece against you guys specifically.
Yeah, against Convention of States.
A group with ties to Trump's orbit.
That would be us.
And corporate America is leading the push.
Corporate America.
Meanwhile, Trump is like, get out of here, you guys. I don't even want you here.
I love it. Corporate America. I do occasionally go to grocery stores owned by corporations, and I mean, that's my tie.
And you admit it.
To my tie to corporate America. I drive a car that was produced by, that's about it, really. This is a grassroots group. There are over 5.2 million people involved, just regular folks all over the country. They're actually in every single state legislative district in the United States of America. And I understand why the establishment is terrified of this. And by the way, there's plenty of establishment on the right that is terrified of this too. They don't want us taking their power away and giving it back to the people. That's the entire purpose of this. The founders intended it for right now. This gets in the Constitution in 1787. Colonel George Mason from Virginia stands up 2 days before the end of convention. He says, this is terrible. We drafted a document, doesn't give the power to the people to propose amendments, but we gave that power to Congress. And he asks, are we so naive that we believe that a government that becomes a tyranny will restrain its own tyranny?
Wow.
Got to give the power to the people, right? And in fact, it's really weird. In Madison's notes, that's where we know everything that happened from the convention. All it says right there is NINCOM, Latin abbreviation for no comment. Not one guy in that room said, George, that's such a stupid idea. Everybody was a forehead slap. I think they probably laughed in that moment. So they put in this second clause of Article 5 saying someday federal government's going to get out of control. We're going to count on you folks in the states to handle it.
Are they gonna?
Yeah. Well, let me just a little further that if you read anything about the founding, the founders were fixated on checks and balances. They wanted to have each branch of government check each other. They wanted have the states to be a check. They were concerned about the aggregation of power into a central government, or particularly because they came from places where there were kings and emperors. They didn't want that power to all be in one place because they knew eventually tyranny would be taken over and the president or leader at the time would do that. And so they put in the United States Senate as a check, and the biggest check was that the United States Senate was going to be appointed by the state legislatures.
Yep.
And people forget that for the first 140 years of the Republic, Washington, D.C. was a backwater town with no power. It was.
Yeah, it wasn't important.
Do you know what the largest source of revenue for the federal government was before the 17th Amendment, which changed the way senators were elected?
We're like selling booze or something?
Exactly. It was the tax on alcohol. It's the reason we got the income tax is because of the temperance movement. because the temperance movement could never pass in Washington. The prohibition couldn't pass in Washington because they couldn't give up the tax on alcohol. So they the conservatives traded their vote for the income tax in exchange for prohibition. So we got the worst of both worlds, in my opinion. But anyway, they also passed a constitutional amendment to change the way senators were elected, to instead of having the states checking Washington from doing things to take the power away from them and the people, now it's the people that elected the Senate. So they took away the biggest check on power of Washington, D.C. And so this is the only other piece of the Constitution left to check power from the states is Article 5 and a convention of states.
I think it was Ben Sass who said maybe like a year ago that we should repeal the 17th.
Oh, absolutely.
Return the Senate to the...
I would before that, it has no chance of that.
Yeah, I agree.
I completely agree. People need to understand there's a lot of people who look at single layer issues, the surface. The people choose the senators. It's way better.
Oh, it sounds way better.
And they say the idea that only the legislators would be able to appoint their friends. No, listen. People have lost their connection with their local politics because there's no skin in the game anymore.
Right.
And not only did the 17th gut state power to that regard, it weakened Article 5 as well because people aren't paying attention to their local races anymore. And the most important too. So I'll throw it to, for one, I when I first heard him say that, I was like, what? Why would you want that? I mean, the initial idea was that better men would appoint senators, and that sounds pretentious and elitist. And then you think about the math of it, the logic, and you're like, people need to be focused on their states. We hear it all the time from members of Congress. They're running for election, and they're like, in our town, crime is up X%. When I get to Washington, I'm going to clean this town up. And it's like, no, you're not. You're going to the federal government to vote on federal policy.
Right.
Our local elected representatives are going to fix that problem, but people lost that connection. So I would be for that. I love the idea of a convention of states. My one fear is it utopian. Like, because I'll tell you this, what I'd love to see? I'd love to see a convention of states happens. The states are all predominantly conservative, which means there's a bunch of things I like. Probably a lot of things I wouldn't agree with, being more moderate. But gun rights, for instance. I'd love to just see them be like, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to issue an amendment and says, to reaffirm the Second Amendment, citizens of this country can keep and bear arms of any type or accessory or otherwise. There you go. We've spelled it out. And then just like stamp. But that's utopian, right? Would something like that really happen? My fear is they'll go in and say, we're going to compromise on the Second Amendment and say, okay, we're going to restrict these things and make sure it's codified now.
Here's one of the important things. Well, there's several important things. Number one is that the convention is being called pursuant to a resolution that has to be adopted, as you see on that map, by 34 states. And the resolution calling the convention is the governing document of the convention. And that resolution, and Mark can go through it because he knows it inside and out better than I do, but that resolution is a resolution that says 3 types of amendments are eligible. All 3 types of amendments are limiting amendments that limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government or spending of the federal government. So an amendment offered at that convention that compromises, as you say, on the Second Amendment and weakens the Second Amendment would thereby strengthen the federal government and would be out of order at the convention.
What if they argued that the Constitution as a facet of government is being limited by taking out some of its protections?
The application, the resolutions themselves specifically say that they're intended to limit the scope, the power, and the jurisdiction of the federal government. So if it's not taking power away from the federal government and returning to the people, it would be what's called non-germane in legal terms. And I want to address something much more practical than that. It's important that people understand. I hear that people are afraid of convention. Convention is a place to get together, have a debate, and make some suggestions. Now, I can tell you in my entire adult life, I've never had anybody say, hey, I'd like you to go to a meeting. We're going to sit around a table. We're going to make some suggestions. And my response was, oh my God, that's so terrifying. Please don't have a discussion. Because what comes out of convention has to be ratified by 38 states. And I'd throw this out to your people who are watching the podcast right now that might be worried about this. I've said this to literally millions of people on the air. My personal email address, mmeckler@cosaction.com. If you're concerned about this, then just in layman's terms, send me the amendment you're worried about And on the bottom of that, list the 38 states that'll ratify it. And the answer is, I've offered that to millions of people. I've not received an email because it's impossible. We talk about the Second Amendment. Today, there are actually 24 states in which you can carry your handgun in the Capitol. I know I've done it in most of them. There are 14 states where you can take a loaded AR, sling it across your back, and sit in the gallery and watch the proceedings. It takes only 13 states to stop any amendment. Are you telling me we can't get 13 states to limit or to stop an amendment to do anything to the Second Amendment? It makes no sense.
I'm for a convention of states for one simple reason. This ain't working.
Exactly.
Like we think we're going to elect these people. Nancy Pelosi, she can't lose. She even said, she held up a glass of water and said, you put a glass of water in my or AOC's district, you put a D on it, it's going to get elected.
That's true.
Yeah, something's got to change. Something.
The reality is that we know where America's headed, and it isn't a pretty place. We are seeing more and more centralization of power. We are seeing our freedoms being violated. We are seeing our culture becoming more and more woke. And the reality is, and let's just, even the biggest reality, we're $31 trillion in debt. I mean, just a few years ago, we were like 6. And all of a sudden, we're like $30 trillion. And by the way, we're looking at 40, 50. At some point, this house of cards falls apart. And we're sitting here saying, well, we'll trust Washington to fix that. Does anyone actually believe they will fix it? No, no one does. So what are you afraid of? Are you afraid of a group of legislators getting together and offering up proposals? Because again, you read the constitutional language. The convention can propose amendments. That's it. Shall call a convention for proposing amendments. That's the quote from Article 5. So they don't ratify anything. They simply offer up suggestions that go to the states for ratification. And do I think we'll have dramatic changes at this convention or proposals that will fundamentally change the Constitution? Probably not. Because it's going to be really hard to get 38 states to ratify anything. But the fact that we would actually call a convention of states and have a national discussion. I mean, imagine if, next week or next month, a convention was being called and having all 50 states send delegates to propose amendments to the Constitution. Everybody would be talking about it.
It'd be amazing.
It'd be on the front page of every paper for months. We would have groups arguing and forming to propose amendments and get behind amendments. We'd have actually civics taught in our schools about what the Constitution is, what rights actually are federal rights, what rights are state rights, where are they better situated. At a time when we are so divided and so broken, having a national conversation about who we are and how we'd like to go forward as a country is really needed.
What if you guys could propose, like in your minds, the amendments that should be proposed? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of them are obvious that most people talk about. One you hear all the time is some form of balanced budget amendment. And I would say it's got to have spending caps and taxation caps tied to it. I mean, this is critical. The folks in Washington, D.C., they're never going to make the hard decisions. Why would they? They get punished for making those decisions. What? Oh, you want to cut off money to children and widows, and that's how it's always presented. So you put in a structure that forces them to make the hard decisions. I think that's a no-brainer.
Term limits for civil servants?
So this is one of my favorites. And if you look at our resolution, this is really important. It does talk about term limits, but it says term limits for members of Congress and federal officials. And it's exactly because of what you said, because you don't want to empower the bureaucracy. You don't want to empower the staffers. If you're going to turn Congress, you better turn federal officials. And by the way, now we know of this as the deep state, right? That was conspiracy theory stuff a couple of years ago. Yeah. But so you can turn out the deep state. When these people are in DC for 30 years, 35 years, they have the power, and they have more power than the politicians, and they're unaccountable and unelected.
Yeah, I'll throw a couple at you. One, I think actually could pass, and I know there are people who might question that, which is to limit the Supreme Court to 9 members. Certainly every Republican would vote for it, but there are some fringe people on the Democratic side who are for court packing, but the vast majority of Democrats out there across the country realize that if we start this game of the Democrats adding 4 and then the Republicans adding, it's a zoo. And so putting that in the Constitution would be, if that's the only thing that comes out of the convention, that actually, and it would, there's no question that will come out of the convention. If that's the only thing that happens, that would actually be a good thing and a stabilizing thing, something we can all sort of agree on. Mm-hmm. And by the way, having something that we can all agree on that's a big deal is good for a country every now and then. We don't see it happen very much.
The other thing I think too, the point you guys made about the 38 states is that these are conservative states that are gearing up towards this. It's not like New York.
31 of the 50 states right now, the legislatures are controlled by Republicans. That's going to go to at least 32 or 33 this year, and maybe more. And with Virginia, which is one house is controlled by Republicans, one is one short in the Senate. You could have 34 states controlled by Republicans, and if that happens, we need 34 states to get to a resolution passed to have this convention called. We could have this convention called in a year or two.
But you'll need 38 to ratify it.
But again, I'd love to see, like I said, I'd love to see the court packing thing, and I'd love to see, for example, the federal government shall play no role in primary and secondary education. And you'd say, well, that'd have no chance of passing. I don't know. If I'm Connecticut or California, I don't want Donald Trump or Rick Santorum coming into Washington, D.C. telling me how to run my schools any more than if I'm in Alabama, I want Joe Biden telling me how to run my schools. So you'd be surprised. Remember, these are state legislators, not congressmen and senators. You'd be surprised how many legislators would say, you know what? We don't want the federal government telling us what to do. So don't be surprised that there will be more things that could limit the power of the federal government that actually could be adopted, even when you need 38 states to do it.
Let me give you a real easy one that most people don't talk about. It's called a single subject amendment. A lot of states have this. And people are furious to get these omnibus bills. They're 2,000 pages.
That no one has read.
No one could read them, to be realistic. And honestly, if you've ever tried, what you would find is there's so many references to other statutes and portions of nobody can understand them, right?
Yeah.
So a single subject amendment says one thing per bill. And the American people, if you ask them, it's 99% of the American people would say, yeah, absolutely, we can ratify that easily.
Yeah. I wonder, how is it that we get this omnibus spending bill? It's like 5,000 pages. Who writes that? And why do people vote on it? I mean, you've got experience there.
Well, every year the Congress is supposed to pass 13 bills to spend the money. And what happens is that takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of time on the floor of the House and Senate, and they don't want to spend all the time talking about those things. So in the end, they put it up all into one bill. It's called an omnibus bill because they didn't pass all the 13. They may have passed 2 or 3 of them.
But there's like random weird stuff thrown in these things.
Look, it is a process by which you have to get 218 votes in the House and 51 votes in the Senate, and or more, in some cases 60 votes in the Senate. So what do? You horse trade. And you say, I don't want to vote for this. Well, how about if I give you this? Okay, I'll vote for it.
Wow.
I mean, that's the way things get done. It's sort of, I don't know if either of you are married, but sometimes you got to have to, give and take a little bit if you're going to get things done. And that's how the process works.
We like to talk about guns as a really good example of how different people live different lives in different terrains, right? So if you live in the mountains, for instance, well, we got bears out here. You certainly want to have some kind of protection for yourself. I don't know how you deal with an actual bear because you're going to need a big gun you're probably not carrying. But a raccoon or a fox,
right?
Maybe we've had raccoons out here, and, you don't want to be chased by one. Should it be ravenous, right? Or whatever,
Coyotes,
for instance, and the chickens. You live in New York City. I get it. You don't want a gun. And then people are shooting each other. Fine. I think the Second Amendment, is for the entire country, including New York, and the people who live there have the right to defend themselves.
Yep. Yeah.
But the idea we often bring up is that the people in New York City who don't like guns vote for people in West Virginia, which makes no sense. I'll give you a better example is air conditioning. You got the people in the blue areas who are like, we don't need air conditioning. It's a luxury and it's bad for the climate. And the people in Miami are like, how dare you? Because they
couldn't live in Miami.
They got a statue of the guy who invented air conditioning down there.
Texas just secedes. They're like,
we're
done here. We're out.
We're out. We need it. We can't live without it. So, that's not the same as a weapon. But that shows you that if you live in a cooler climate with less hot days, you're probably thinking to yourself, who needs this stuff?
That's fine. Well, that's fine. If we're going to get rid of air conditioning in the South, we'll get rid of heat in the North.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, heat burns as much energy as air conditioning, right? Same process.
It sounds like that's the problem with compromise because, you're in office and someone says, I want to spend X amount of dollars in this place for this reason. You're like, well, that doesn't matter that much to me. Give me this and I'll do it. You basically start getting these weird policies
that's why you have to take the jurisdiction away from the
Absolutely.
government. You're never going to look that's happened since the beginning of the Republic. They've always been horse trading. That it has to be that way. And you can make the argument that it actually reflects the needs of the different parts of the country, because you horse trade for something that I want in Alabama that you need in New York. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. What's wrong is that they shouldn't have the jurisdiction to do things that are not within the federal government's purview.
Yeah, the question is, how much power do they have, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's
if you take the power away, then you limit the amount of horse trading that goes on to the things that are more fundamental to the federal.
And honestly, most people then wouldn't care about what goes on in Washington, D.C., which is really how it was always intended to be. What you were supposed to care about were your local politics. What was the local school board doing? What's your city council or township doing? Those were the things that were supposed to affect you as a citizen. The founders would be stunned that we allow so much stuff to happen in Washington.
And the federal
DC.
government was supposed to care of making sure that we were safe from foreign threats, that there was interstate commerce that could flow between the two, and that we had some trade policy to make sure that we were able to trade goods and services back and forth. And we've gone way beyond. And the answer is to pull it back.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., and we'll see you all there.